Whether you play Conquest, Duel, or even Joust, there's always some kind of inherent fear that comes along with queuing up for a ranked game. Today we're going to be analyzing the reasoning behind this ranked anxiety, why it happens, as well as trying to lessen the effects it's going to have on your play. Ranked anxiety is a very common term, and I believe it originated from League of Legends, although I could be wrong about that. Wherever it came from, it's used to describe the feeling of dread that comes up with entering queue for any competitive mode in any game. However, for this video, I'd like to try and keep everything as Smite related as possible, as Smite players don't have a lot of resources to use for coping with or even getting rid of this anxiety. The first thing you need to understand to overcome ranked anxiety is that you aren't alone. A lot of people have some sort of mentality that prevents them from even trying out ranked. And while fear is more often than not a positive emotion that keeps us from doing inherently dangerous and stupid things, there's almost no reason to start playing ranked if you feel you're ready. But before I get too far into rambling about this topic, I'm going to break down how I plan to do this video. I'll be taking reasons you might be anxious about queuing up for ranked, the problems they cause, and how best to overcome them. And I've tried to let the topics bleed into each other as much as possible as well, to avoid too much confusion and jumping around in the video. So jumping right into it, I'm going to start with the most common phrase I hear when I ask people about this. I'm not good enough. Now obviously this can be applied to both Conquest and Duel, although a lot of players use this to try and avoid disappointing teammates, which, while admirable, is a very misguided thought. Both ranked and casual play use an ELO system to match you with players of your level specifically to avoid the classification of good or bad being used in a certain game. However, even with this matchmaking system in place, a lot of people new to the ranked scene often get discouraged because of their first few qualifying matches. Since the system considers you of average skill the first time you play ranked, anyone under the average will often do poor in these matches, maybe get harassed by their team, and then just ditch the concept of ranked entirely because of a few bad games. This is exactly what creates the stigma of ranked, what makes people think that there's some minimum level of required skill to play ranked, as well as for some reason they haven't met that level of skill. Before I get into how you'll want to overcome this, I just want you to know that there are a few basic requirements, in my eyes at least, for playing ranked. I would recommend you have the ability to play 5 gods in every role, as well as having them mastered. You should also have accurate knowledge of the game and the current meta, and I'd say around 300 normal conquest games at the very minimum. Now, while these may seem like steep requirements, you'll probably be well on your way to completing them by the time you hit level 30, and you can obviously play ranked before this, and Duel doesn't really have any quote-unquote requirements, but I would definitely make sure you have these covered and you don't just immediately jump into ranked at level 30 if you don't want to end up stuck in bronze forever. Anyways, the best way to overcome this I'm not good enough type of anxiety is simply through endurance. Play your first 10 qualifying games, and then play a few games after, and see how the players the game matches you with will creep closer to your skill level. Don't concern yourself with what rank you get placed in or how far away from your goal it is. Well, first of all, you shouldn't have a specific goal when you go into ranked, but I'm going to talk about that later on in the video. And secondly, the whole point of ranked is to give yourself a measurement of how good you are in a competitive environment. And while there have been lots of complaints about matchmaking and the ranking system in general, the system works as well as it can, and hiccups in the system are few and far between. Just play simply to play. Forget about how you might not be above the average skill level. From a technical standpoint, half the players that play ranked are going to be below average, and that's why it's called an average. The inverse thought process of this is, I might get bad teammates, and this is an even worse mentality. I understand that having bad teammates can be frustrating, and it's going to happen a lot in your qualifying games, but with any luck, I understand that having teammates that are a lower skill level than you can be frustrating, and it's going to happen a lot in your qualifying games, but with any luck, the enemies you get are going to be just as bad, and you'll be able to carry. Whether or not this is the case, the people you get matched with or against are largely out of your control, but luckily with Season 3, you can now queue with up to 3 friends, so if you somehow manage to meet anyone competent in your games, you can add them and take them along in future games. Unfortunately, beyond finding players to queue with, there isn't much that can be done about bad teammates, and they're just generally an accepted concept in any team game, so the only real way to handle it is to get over it. I know that isn't great advice, but bad teammates are for the most part unavoidable, and while there are ways you can improve the team's overall performance, there isn't much to be done if you get someone whose skill level is below yours. So moving on past performance issues, which I've stated 100 times before, but I really want to try and send the point home, it shouldn't be preventing you from playing ranked. But keeping on the topic of teammates, I'd like to talk a bit about toxic teammates. This is another huge one I hear people worry about, the fear of getting toxic teammates, people whose sole existence seems to be to try and piss you off and ruin your day. The people who feed relentlessly and then spam "you rock" while threatening to report every other player in the game. These people are a disease. Don't give them attention. Most of the time, that's what they're looking for, and the more you give to them, the more they want, and the less time you're spending playing the game. If someone seems uncontrollably toxic, just mute them and move on with the game. You're gonna be stuck with them for at least 10 minutes, so don't let them ruin your experience by paying attention to them. Getting a toxic player in your team is another unavoidable occurrence, and while it does suck, at least there's a way to make it less detrimental to your team. However, on the topic of toxic teammates being more common in ranked, that's actually quite far from the truth. See, you'd think that with ranked being the actual competitive mode of Smite, that people would be more prone to throwing fits or raging, but luckily raging and blaming others is exactly what gets you placed in bronze, which is generally seen as sort of a cesspool of trolls and ragers, but is actually still surprisingly easy to climb out of, and avoid if you put in enough effort. Another reason toxic teammates aren't prevalent has to do with curse voice. You'll see almost everyone in ranked using curse voice, and while it's not required, it actually prevents a lot of the toxicity that would otherwise run rampant. I feel like voice chat takes away a lot of the anonymity that a screen and keyboard provide, and communication feels a lot more personal, which makes raging and blaming others a lot harder to do. And I'd like to take this opportunity, now that we're talking about curse voice, to tell you guys that you shouldn't be concerned about whether or not you use curse voice when you play ranked. I'm gonna get a lot of flack for saying this, but don't let people tell you it's some required asset. Ranked is about finding your individual skill level and how high you can climb, and curse voice only helps with that. There are players in Diamond and even Grandmaster who don't use Curse. It's a third-party program, and I guarantee even if voice chat was implemented directly into Smite, there would still be a sizable amount of people who don't use it. Don't get me wrong here, I recommend you use Curse Voice when playing Ranked, but if you don't have a mic or for some reason you just don't want to use voice chat, it's definitely not required. Now on to the topic of goals, which I said I was going to talk about earlier. I'm going to end this video after I talk about this, because I've covered just about every reason you could shy away from ranked. Whether you want this season's gold skin or ranked border or just want a sense of personal achievement, a lot of people will set goals like, oh, I want to reach Diamond 5 in under a month. And while I have no problem with people aiming to improve their rank, you shouldn't set goals like this. Goals with any time frame put unnecessary stress on you, and they can make losses feel detrimental when really they're just unavoidable. Don't get me wrong, wanting to improve is good, and the whole point of playing ranked for most people, but putting a time limit on any task makes it feel like work rather than fun, which, as I've said before, is the ultimate goal of any game. This is more of something that you specifically shouldn't do rather than a reason to be anxious about rank, but it's a huge no-no, and if you do it, it's just going to make the anxiety worse. A great way to deal with losses, or even loss streaks for that matter, is to just try and think back about some of the games you've had a few months ago. Chances are, if you even remember the games you've played way back then, you probably don't even remember if the particular games were wins or losses, or how you felt after the game. In the end, rank just isn't about individual games. It's about judging your skill level over hundreds of games, and no one can maintain a 100% win rate with over 100 games. So just keep playing. This also doesn't mean just put the losses behind you and forget about them. Whether or not you believe the loss was your fault, there's always things to learn from each games, and always ways to improve. Anyways, I think I've rambled on enough because I'm starting to get off topic here, so I hope you not only enjoyed this video but were able to learn something from it. The common theme with overcoming ranked anxiety seemed to be endurance, so just keep playing and try not to think of ranked as this big scary monster, because the more you play, the easier it's gonna get. So if I was unclear about something, maybe you have ranked anxiety for a different reason and you'd like insight on it, or just have general feedback, you can always leave a comment and I'll respond to it as soon as I see it. Until next time, I'm Everything Goat, and I don't have an outro.